Hello and welcome to Talkernate History, the podcast where we,
Matt
and Max, talk about works of alternate history scenarios, and history in general. This episode, we watched a movie.
What a movie it was.
You may have noticed we've been watching a couple movies now. We're kind of going to experiment with regularly watching history-adjacent films, and
Emphasis on the adjacent for some of them.
yeah, some of them are truly works of alternate history, and some of them are history in general. We've got some really great ones on the short list that we want to check out. But this time we checked out a movie called Dragon Seed. And we checked it out for one reason and one reason only. Well, not one reason only, but the main reason is because we were looking up other movies that have Walter Huston in it. Because he just seems to be just gold.
He's the gift that keeps on giving.
So this is Walter Huston movie number 3 right here, and
Christmas has come multiple times this year,
and there's many more. He's in the North Star. He's in some other pretty interesting looking stuff.
He found a real niche, it seems like, in the 30s and 40s.
Yeah, propaganda movie, play old guy who's right about everything. That's what he is so far. But yeah, this movie is unique. It's remembered for pretty much one big reason, and that's because it is a propaganda movie, a World War II propaganda movie, all about how brave and valiant our Chinese allies are. Except the Chinese people are all played by white people.
Yes, there is a lot of yellow face, I guess you call it, or Asian face, or whatever the term is. But because the first picture we saw was a picture of Walter Huston, who got the most ridiculous makeup on, but the worst part about it is this giant ridiculous Fu Manchu like beard and mustache combination.
The wispy little sides to his mustache, it's just so absurd looking. And a lot of times he's wearing a rice hat and stuff, or like a silk shirt, and it just looks, it's just, every time I would see him on screen I would just start chuckling.
Well, it just for the modern day, this movie is just outrageous.
Oh,
because the main female character is played by Katharine Hepburn.
Katharine Hepburn playing a Chinese person. Oh my God. And her voice is the Katharine Hepburn voice. Just with a little bit of, just a slight almost accent. Not really, but just like kind of a sing-songy way of talking.
But they make sure that everyone has their slanted eyes and their...
Yeah.
I mean, and the crazy thing is there actually are a lot of Asian actors in this film. They just play either children or background characters.
Yes. The only one I can really clearly remember is... And we'll get to the plot of this film, but near the middle of the movie, there's like a group of people who are moving factory equipment, and the leader of them is Asian, and he talks on screen for about a minute or two, and I believe that's Philip Ahn, A-H-N, Ahn, and he's like a prolific actor who was in everything.
Yeah, but he speaks the most clearly and intelligibly as anyone does in this movie.
Yeah, everyone else speaks like kind of a weird pidgin English with weird grammar and kind of the sing-songy kind of thing, kind of mimicking the tones of Chinese, where this guy just talks normal, like a normal person.
He's like, okay, well, we've got to take this factory and go here. And the thing is, yeah, because, and Max is right, is that we are writing down multiple times as we're taking notes as we're watching this film. They talk in this weird, like, Yoda-y, like, idiom-centric, idiomatic way of talking. Like, what are some good quotes you actually took?
Well, okay, I'll kind of segue this quote into the beginning of the movie. Like, the movie opens with a field, people working in the field. A narrator says, "This is the Valley of Ling." Not really clear where that is.
Somewhere in central China.
It seems like it, yeah.
1937, summer of 1937.
1937. So that's the year that the
Sino-Japanese War really kicks off. Yeah.
Yeah. Nanking, all that stuff happened this year.
Yeah.
And they're planting rice, and seeing Walter Huston in shorts planting rice is so ridiculous. We're also introduced to a couple other characters. there's a gentleman. He's played by a man named Turhan Bey.
I think it's Lao
Lao I believe that's correct. Yeah.
because Walter Huston is Ling Tan.
Yeah, he's Ling Tan. His son-in-law is Lao His daughter...
No, it's his son is Lao It's his
son-
daughter. Because remember, he has 3 sons.
Yes.
Because they say weird stuff. They're like third cousin, fourth brother.
Oh my God.
Second wife, second daughter, which is their daughter-in-law, or third daughter. It's just very...
It's getting very confused.
They have this... but again, it is this weird idiomatic way of talking that is very not PC for these times.
Well, I'll give you a great example. So there's that opening where they're working in the fields, and one guy says, I have not seen her since the sun was in the center of the sky, instead of I haven't seen her since noon.
Eat first, my son, and your arm will be much stronger for the beating.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of talking of wife beating in this movie.
It's really quite... It's shocking. Like,
Yes.
it's this... Even, I think it was supposed to be shocking for, like, the era. It was supposed to be, you know, like, look at these Chinese. They're really like us, but they're so alien and inscrutable and different.
Well, I think it's like we can sympathize with these people, but they are still backwards compared to us. I think that's the tone that it's setting. That deep down, they're people just like us, and they're just trying to survive, and they're just trying to live a good life.
And just like us, they hate those damn Japanese.
There's a lot of anti-Japanese stuff in this movie. Red meat for the audience, I'm sure.
Remember Pearl Harbor? I half expected everyone to stand up at the end and say that.
Remember Pearl Harbor, which happens 4 years from now. But remember it, though. But yeah, God, and that opening scene is just so goofy. There's a scene where one of the sons is on a water buffalo and he's playing a flute, and I just could not stop laughing. It was I had to rewind it a couple times because it was just so silly looking.
And in the background, you hear like this very stereotypical Chinese music.
The xylophone.
Xylophone.
Imagine in your mind stereotypical Asian music. And
Yeah.
that's the score for most of the movie.
Yeah. So, and also, by the way, Katharine Hepburn, her name is just Jade.
Yeah, Jade. She has a quote unquote normal name.
And then there's Orchid, is her sister-in-law.
Yeah. And everyone else is like, well, just a Chinese name, you know, a 2-syllable name.
So long story short is you have these people who live in the Valley of Ling, and they're peaceful and all they want to do is farm. And there's like this kind of family drama at first because Jade isn't very close with her husband.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
like then they grow closer. So it's this weird, almost like soap opera-y like thing for the first 30 minutes.
And it has to be said because the relation between Katharine Hepburn and her husband is extremely weird. Because there's some lines of dialogue that really make you question what the hell is going on here. It's something to the effect of, so Katharine Hepburn and her husband are in their bedroom, and she's like, if you would take me while I was willing, it would be the first time since we were married, or something like that.
Yeah,
it's like,
that's...
What? What are you saying?
Because they're not newlyweds.
No. So how many? Oh my God. It is just... the implications of that
are pretty horrifying. Yeah.
Very horrifying.
There's a lot of horrifying implications in this film. This film is like kind of a roller coaster.
It really is.
Because at first you have like kind of this, it could be almost like a set piece from like a movie about ancient China or something like that.
Yeah, you would never know it was in the modern era when you first started watching the movie. Because there's no machines. There's
no Westerners. Well, actually, other than the people playing.
Except for Walter Huston and Katharine Hepburn.
And then Turhan Bey, who's the most Asian of the main characters, is half Turkish, half Austrian in real life, or was.
Yeah. The Bey part is a stage name, but he is part Turkish. I looked up his IMDb. He was acting until the 90s.
Oh wow.
He was in Babylon 5.
Oh.
Have you heard of this show?
I have heard of it.
Yeah, I'm more of a Star Trek Deep Space Nine fan myself, but I've tried watching Babylon 5. It seems fine. I haven't watched very much of it. But anyway, his character name is Emperor Turhan, which...
I guess it makes it easy when you're on set.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, no. So okay, so we're in the Valley of Ling, and you hear these warnings of an approach of a war, but it seems far away.
Yeah.
This is mainly people concerned with their own domestic problems.
Yeah, there's a lot of domestic drama.
They talk
stuff
about,
at the
there's a lot of men sitting around smoking what appears to be opium.
We thought it was opium, but later that theory is put to bed because Walter Huston says, "I can't believe you would sell opium. I thought we eliminated that poison from our land." So I guess it's just tobacco.
I guess so.
I guess.
Well, and they also refer to the Japanese as those little dwarves from the Eastern Islands.
Yeah, interesting.
Huh.
They don't seem to be that much shorter than them in the movie.
They do not. No. Oh, also one other thing before we get in is that Katharine Hepburn has a lot of weird like facial.
Oh my God.
How would you describe it, Max?
Her head just doesn't stop moving. It just keeps tilting left and right and left and right. And like her upper teeth are showing a lot while she smiles.
Weird slasher smile kind of.
I wonder if it's because she's squinting while smiling, so it's making her lips curl up more. I don't know, but it's very. I don't know where that is coming from. That mannerism of hers. It's strange.
Yes,
to say the least.
There's a small village where they live, and then there's a city nearby. And when you go to the city, they meet the brother-in-law. The oldest child, the daughter of Walter Huston, is married to a man named Wu Lien. And how do we know he's Wu Lien, Max?
We know because it's said in Western letters, Wu Lien, all capital.
Over his shop.
Over his shop. And it's so weird because we see Chinese characters on signs everywhere else in the movie. But this one part here, Wu Lien. Very, very strange.
Good old Wu Lien.
And they're seeing him because Turhan Bey is trying to buy a book for Katharine Hepburn, for Jade.
She wants a book.
Yeah. They're going to buy a book called All Men Are Brothers, which is a reference to the book The Water Margin, which is also called All Men Are Brothers. And
it's also, we're brothers with them. The Chinese and us, we're all brothers.
Yeah, there's a lot of, these people are just like us in this movie. Like there's a part where they talk about, what must the other side of the world be like? Well, I hear all the children are born with white hair and they have blue eyes. And it's like, are you forgetting about black people? There's also black people on the other side of the planet as well.
True. He talks about how he owns all of the earth through the earth to the other side.
Yes.
Which is is much more timely these days because the modern Chinese regime has a penchant for claiming territory that isn't really near it.
The, what is it? The 10- line, the 11- line. It's something like that. The map that they publish showing all the islands in the South China Sea that they own.
Yeah. They claim all of it, basically.
Yeah, pretty much. The Spratleys will be yours.
Yes.
Not until Tom Clancy
comes.
That's
right. SSN. Yeah, he's going to stop you. But we meet Wu Lien. Wu Lien's a big fat guy with an Eastern European accent.
Yeah, he seems to be Russian or Armenian or something.
I think the actor who played him was Armenian. But he doesn't look Chinese whatsoever.
At all. Some people in this movie almost kind of pull it off. Turhan Bey looks Asian. Because he sort of is a little bit. But this guy, not at all. Wu Lien, not at all. He is a white man.
So Wu, by the way, when he goes to see Wu Lien to get a book, Wu Lien, when he's talking to him, he's saying, well, I need a book. And he's like, oh, men can read books for their pleasure in private. So it's like he's offering to sell his brother-in-law porn, I guess.
Erotic novels. I read it for the articles, of course.
That's right.
That All Men Are Brothers book, this just came to me. So this movie is based on a book by Pearl S. Buck, who is this woman who lived in China pretty much until her adulthood. Her
parents were missionaries.
Yeah, her parents were missionaries. I think they were from West Virginia. And I think she translated the book All Men Are Brothers into English. So I think she has a special attachment to that book. I could be wrong.
She may have, yeah.
I think so.
When she wrote The Good Earth.
She wrote The Good Earth, which is a good book. I like it. I really enjoyed it when I was forced to read it in middle school.
It's kind of a depressing book.
It is. Kind of like this movie, actually, a little bit.
This movie, is often depressing.
There's similar themes. There's a lot of talk about working the earth and I can't leave my home. My home is my life. The land is everything. That comes up in this movie too. Apparently they made The Good Earth movie with the great Paul Mooney as the main character.
Nice.
Yeah.
Scarface himself.
Scarface. One of the
we'll have to
awesome
talk about some pre-code movies.
Yeah.
Sometime.
Well, Gabriel over the White House is technically
That's
one
true.
of them. Yeah.
How
could you forget him?
But he's in but Wu Lien, he sells Japanese goods, and these Chinese students, like nationalists, come and destroy his shop.
Yeah.
Because you can't collaborate with the enemy.
But something interesting is that they're students, but the politics are never specific in this movie. They never mention the KMT. They never mention communism. It's all just China patriots versus bad guy Japanese. That's the whole politics of the entire film, which is interesting.
And also, by the way, there's a ton of sexual tension in this early part of this movie.
So much. There's like the bedroom scene.
It's pretty explicit for a movie of its era.
It really is, yeah.
I mean, it doesn't show anything. It doesn't even show people kissing, I think, at all.
Yeah, that's right. It's so bizarre. So Katharine Hepburn and her husband turn the lights off and they start rubbing their cheeks together, which is interesting. Some Chinese kisses, I guess.
But yeah, they do cheek touching.
And Walter Huston and his wife, they have a little bit of they talk about some things. Some
Back when you were young and gusty. I remember.
Young and gusty, he says to his wife.
Whatever that means.
I really liked it when you made gusts for me.
Very James Joycean.
Yeah. I love it.
But ultimately, people are fleeing the war, and more of them come by their farm. And at one point, people moving this factory come by, and Lao and Jade decide to join them.
Yeah.
But also, she's pregnant at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so they leave, but then the Japanese come.
Yes. So there's some important and interesting pieces of equipment in a couple scenes.
Yes.
The first time we see the Japanese, it's his airplanes that are flying by. And we tried to identify the aircraft. It kind of looks like B-26s.
Yeah, they look kind of like B-26s.
In the long shot, when it comes up close, we don't know what the hell it is.
Well, it does appear to be at least partially a short Sterling.
Yeah, it's a toy. It's a toy, to be clear.
But the cockpit area looks like a short Sterling, but it's a twin engine rather than a 4-engine bomber.
And the tail is kind of off.
I think it's just an amalgamation someone created.
Some child made it out of paper mache. And then we also see some single engine fighters, which might be P-51s, but
they're too far away to get a good idea.
Yeah. Oh, and then, so when we see the Japanese approaching the village by land, far away, we see a bunch of tanks, and they look like they're FT-17s.
They're definitely FT-17s.
Yeah, gotta be. But then they get closer, and they look different.
They look like Stewards probably dressed up, or some sort of fake tank.
Yeah, some light, tiny tanks.
Well, the Japanese show up, and they are the most caricatures you can imagine.
They are bad guys, everyone.
A lot of them have big buck teeth.
Yeah, there's one guy who has teeth like the freaking Mask, like the son of the Mask over here, Jamie Kennedy. He looks absurd.
And they're just pillaging through the area.
The most harrowing part of the whole movie is they kill Orchid, and they show an assault, which is really hard to watch.
Well, the Japanese soldiers assault and murder Orchid, and then it's the mother of Wu Lian.
Yeah.
And I mean, you don't see anything, but you hear women screaming, and it's very clear what they're intimating what's happening.
Yeah, the implication is pretty obvious. Even like one of the Japanese soldiers says, "I hear a child, and where there's children, there's women." And then it's horrible.
And then you see their bodies later, and Orchid's been shot in the head. Actually,
I can't think. I watch a lot of old movies. I can't think of a single old movie that showed someone shot in the head, like a bullet wound in the middle of their forehead. I can't think of a single one except for this.
Yeah, and so you have the Japanese have now occupied, and they're committing these atrocities. They're stealing food from the Chinese, and they're confiscating stuff. And
you see people getting shot in the street. You see their shadows.
They just get shot for no reason. Wu Lian becomes a collaborator.
Yeah.
He gets rich off of that again. So there's three brothers. So we talked about earlier. You have Lao. So he flees with Jade. They're in free China. So they talk about free China, which is something I want to talk about in a minute. And then you have his two other brothers. One water buffalo guy who goes into the hills to fight.
Yeah, who becomes a total psycho by the end of the movie.
He does, like this slasher, loves to kill Japanese people.
We'll talk about the scene, but there's an awesome scene in this movie.
It's wild.
It's really cool.
And then there's the other brother, Orchid's husband. So he flees to fight too, and they leave. He has two children who he leaves with his parents, and those two children die.
Yeah, it's pretty.
They die of starvation.
Messed up. Yeah.
Then Jade comes back with Lao Turhan Bey, and they have a child. They have a grandchild, and that reinvigorates Walter Huston and his wife.
Yeah, that's the lowest point of the entire movie, where the two kids die of starvation, which then everything after that is oddly much happier, even though it's still pretty messed up.
Yeah, so they come from free China and they say, let's resist. They bring guns.
Yes, Craig Jorgensen's.
Yes.
Yeah. Woo.
And so they start launching attacks on the Japanese. And tell them, Max, about that scene where they attack the Japanese in the village.
It's so great. Yeah, so they're going to ambush these Japanese soldiers. So most of them have Craig Jorgensen's, and you can tell they're Craig Jorgensen's because it's got that weird little...
The feed chute on the side, yeah.
Yeah, that thing. They even say, there's odd foreign letters on this. And they say, ask not what gifts may be given to you. Everyone speaks in weird Yoda talk in this movie. It's never clear sentences. They always do things backwards, which is funny because Chinese is subject, verb, object. It's just like English. It's normal sentence construction. But they ambush these Japanese. They're shooting them. Even Walter Huston is getting in on the action. He's got this weird...
It's like a Sharps rifle, but is firing like a cap gun.
Yeah, like a percussion cap or whatever.
But they kill the Japanese soldiers, and then they talk about burying them underneath Walter Huston's house.
Like he's a serial killer or something.
Oh, but that scene, though, the end of it.
Oh, my God, yeah. There's a part where
the third
brother jumps in front of this horse cart. It stops it, and the Japanese soldier is like, please don't shoot me. And he says, I'm not gonna shoot you. And he pulls out this big knife and stabs him. And he's got this crazy look on his face.
It was wild.
It's crazy.
This movie has very abrupt and shocking thematic changes to it. Like the tonal shifts in this movie are wild.
It's a roller coaster. The highs, like when this movie started, we were laughing our asses off. And then it got really serious, and then we were laughing a lot more near the end of the movie.
Well, at the beginning, we couldn't stop joking about, just the ridiculous Walter.
Just looking at Walter Huston, just looking at Katharine Hepburn, it's just so funny.
Oh, and Walter Huston has a penchant for, how would you describe it, Max? Chewing the scenery.
Oh my God, he's got multiple scenes where he's just basically saying, Academy, Best Supporting Actor? Come on.
Well, he's like staring wide-eyed into the camera talking about, and for these men must not, it's just...
The lighting on him is absolutely perfect, and he's just like, oh, I'm giving my stirring speech right now.
Oh, it's crazy. Oh, and also, by the way, we forgot earlier on, you heard the Chinese national anthem being sung in English?
Yeah, they're talking about, we will build a new great wall, and we will throw down bond slavery.
We will not be bond slaves.
Bond slaves, yeah. Not just regular slaves, but slaves to bonds.
James Bond.
We won't be certificate of deposit slaves. We won't...
Oh yeah, and just other things that they say stuff like life without you would be like a carrot without salt.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
I don't what did you mean by this? Oh my God, there's also a scene where they shoot a dog, which is super crazy.
The Japanese always have like slasher smiles on their faces and love to kill and all that. But, the thing is that, to just comment sort of on the history side of it, is that obviously, so summer of 1937 is the beginning of the Sino-Japanese War. And this movie, though, in its own way, really hones in on the absolute brutality that the Japanese treated the Chinese with. I know the Soviets had the highest death toll of World War II, but it probably was at least 20 million Chinese died as well.
It's crazy to even think about.
I mean, the behavior of the Japanese at places like Nanking, the Americans tried after the war. Was it 2 Japanese officers who engaged in like contests about how many people could they kill in an hour with swords or something like that?
Yeah.
I mean, the brutality of the Japanese and the way that they treated the Chinese is really, this movie for its time couldn't get into that, but like it hints at that.
It gets into some pretty nasty, horrible stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it really
on a small
does.
scale.
And to be honest, it has to, in order to be taken seriously as a movie. I mean, you want the audience to be exposed to the horror of all this.
Mm-hmm.
You want to tell them that the Chinese people are fighting as our allies, and they're facing such adversity. I mean, it's a propaganda movie. You got to tell them this crazy stuff, But
the movie, for its time, really addresses more headlong these sorts of the massacres and just the absolute awful way that the Japanese treated the Chinese during the war. And the thing is that, which is crazy, is that we were talking about earlier about the references to free China. So for much between 1937 and 1944, there were very significant parts of China that were under Japanese control. But there were also very large parts of China, even up to the coast of China. So much of China north of the Yangtze River was occupied. And the Yangtze River Valley up past Nanking which is the most populous area of China. However, in southern China, there were pockets along the coast, Hong Kong, around what's now Guangdong, which would have been Canton, Hainan Island, and stuff like that. But much of southern China and western China was not occupied by the Japanese. The nationalists controlled it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until actually Operation Ichigo in 1944 where the Japanese conquered large portions of southern China by attacking north from Indochina and south from Nanking to, first of all, knock out American airfields that were operational, but also to create a land link. But so when they talk about free China, it wasn't like all of China was under occupation. There were very significant portions. And the Chinese, well, they did kind of the Russian thing, which is they just kept retreating farther and farther. So at first it was Shanghai, then it was Nanking, and then they went to what they called Chongqing at the time, which is now Chongqing. Is it Chongqing?
I think so, yeah.
Which is a massive city in western China. It's near the Sichuan province, but deep. The Japanese could raid it by air, but they never got close on the ground.
And most of the Chinese population is on that coastline. So I assume there was also a huge refugee crisis with people fleeing the Japanese in huge numbers, which we see a little bit of in this movie.
But just the absolute brutality of how the way the Japanese, and it's something that resonates to this day.
Yes.
The way the Japanese handled themselves in World War II. I mean, there are reasons why Japanese relationships with China, the Philippines, Taiwan, South Korea.
Yeah.
I mean, there's years ago, I remember South Koreans were literally cutting off their fingers and mailing them to the Japanese embassy as a protest. People were cutting off fingers because the thing about the Japanese is that the Japanese government really does not like to talk about the fact that they committed war crimes and atrocities. Unlike the Germans tackle that head on. The Japanese don't. I mean, I probably have talked about this before, but when I went to Japan, I went to, oh God, I forget the name of the museum that's attached to the Yasukuni Shrine. It is a wild museum to go to because you read it and you'd think the Japanese were the heroes of World War II. It was like we were forced into attacking America. We had to because they were cutting off our oil. No mention of the disgraceful manner in which the Japanese behaved themselves in China and other occupied countries. No mention of it at the Yasukuni Shrine. They honor war dead that include war criminals who were executed by the Allies, those who committed really, unspeakable atrocities. The way that the Japanese treated prisoners of war, this is something that we shouldn't forget. Their occupation of China was brutal in just so many ways.
And the comfort women issue as well, especially with Korea, the basically enlisting of women to serve in brothels against their will.
And the fact they won't even admit they did it.
They won't even admit it. Well, they won't. They'll offer recompense, but they also won't admit they did anything wrong.
They'll offer. In the past they've offered money, but they won't admit fault.
Yes,
and it's I think something very ingrained in the culture. I don't know what it is.
It must be that's the only explanation.
The Japanese government has avoided taking direct responsibility for its actions in a way that the German government. The German government does not deny that the Holocaust happened. It embraces that fact, and it's paid a lot of reparations. And the German government does not run from that fact. The Japanese government does. And no wonder they make a lot of people in East Asia very angry with that.
And just look at Hirohito was still in charge. Well, not in charge. He was never really in charge.
Yeah.
But, he's still the head of state.
Until 1989.
Until 1989, which is insane to think that I almost lived at the same time as Hirohito.
That's right.
But
you were born in 1916, though, so you did live a lot of your life.
But
this movie does address that in its own, at times, almost ham-fisted way.
Yeah. The Japanese are bad guys, and
they make them cartoonish in this.
They're cartoonishly bad in several parts. Like, so near the end of the movie, Katharine Hepburn decides she's going to kill Wu Lian and a bunch of Japanese guys
because Ling Tan's cousin, his wife, has gone to Wu Lian and told them that Ling Tan's hiding guns and he buried the bodies underneath because she's angry because she thinks that her son, who was murdered by the Japanese, should have been married to Jade. The family relations get a little confusing. And then her husband, so she tells Wu Lian, so once they find out about that, they're like, oh, how do we stop him from telling the Japanese? And her husband also talks about how he beats her
Yeah, it's like, well, she's not going to tell the Japanese anymore because I really beat her to an inch of her life or something, and he's one of the good guys. I
Yes.
think he's third cousin.
Third cousin.
I
That's
think
what they
that's
call him.
his name.
He's
yeah.
played by the same actor who plays an angel in It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, what's his name? It's
I forget the name, but
gosh, Clarence. I think it's Clarence. Yeah.
Boddicker.
And he also looks ridiculous in the movie, smoking his pipe with this little skull cap on. And it's so silly.
It's outrageous. So, also, by the way, we're told that the Japanese are giving candy laced with opium to children.
Maybe that's true. I don't know, but it sounds a bit crazy, honestly.
Oh, and the Japanese refer to the Chinese people as Chinamen, which is very strange.
Yeah, that's like their slur for them, I guess. I don't know. It's depicted that way in the movie.
So,
Katharine Hepburn is gonna mass poison all these guys.
Well, she's gonna poison Wu Lien, but she flees into the kitchen because they're cooking a feast for all the Japanese officers.
And she decides to poison the stew and pretty much just
kill gravy to go on top of their roast duck.
Their roast duck, yes.
And
ducks are very important in this movie. It begins Walter Huston is plucking a duck, and then a duck is the author of the bad guy's demise at the end.
This movie also was definitely made before the ASPCA was on board because there's like fish that are pulled out of the water.
Clearly alive fish.
Yeah. Animals that are... Oh, at one point there's a almost goofy scene where these people are foraging for food and they pick up what's clearly like a stuffed animal that's supposed to look like a dog. Yeah. And they start shoving it into like a burlap sack and then people start fighting over it.
That looked pretty goofy, yeah. But yeah, so she poisons the sauce, poisons the gravy for the duck, and all of the Japanese guys are dying. They look really goofy, and they're like, my stomach hurts. Oh. And one of the officers, this bald-headed guy, who I'm pretty sure is a white guy, shoots our boy Lien, and
he goes Chinaman,
shoots him, and then
he thinks he's been poisoned by him.
He pulls out a Luger, which is interesting. Interesting piece of equipment. That reminds me, we also see a Japanese soldier with a Krag Jorgensen earlier in the movie.
That's the one with the "Don't shoot me." Oh, I won't shoot you.
I won't.
That scene is insane. What is going on here?
What a movie. What a film. What a film.
So Jade flees back and she decides they need to leave. Oh, while she's talking to Walter Huston at one point, her child is chewing on a bullet casing.
Yeah.
And it's funny because her child is Chinese, is clearly Asian.
Yeah, that's so funny. There's all the kids in the movie are actually Asian. I guess because they didn't want to like dye kids' hairs black or, put makeup on little kids. So they just have Asian babies. Which, one of the funniest parts of the movie, Walter Huston is shown his grandson, and it's like, but his face looks so strange. And eventually he says his head is too square, but we were joking. What's wrong with his eyes? What is this thing? Why doesn't he look like us? I don't understand.
Caked in bad makeup. So they eventually decide they bring word from Free China, Jade and Lao and they say you have to burn your farms, everyone, as an act of solidarity, and then flee to Free China to fight in the resistance.
And they debate over whether to do it or not. Ling Tan, Walter Huston, doesn't want to do it at first because he's all about working the land and his home is all he knows. But eventually he's won over by his children and convinced that the fight against the Japanese trumps everything else and that they have to do this act. And they set fire to their house and fire to their fields. And let me tell you, the stunt people in this movie deserve so much money because those burning scenes look insanely dangerous.
Yeah. Just like flames engulfing around them all as they're doing. I mean,
like this thatch roofed cottage goes up in 2 seconds and in a just white hot flame. I couldn't believe my eyes watching the ending. And it's just scene after scene of other people burning their farms. It's like you're not sure if it's going to be just our main characters who burn their farms, but then everyone burns their farm. And the whole countryside is on fire by the end of it.
Oh, and we forgot something too earlier is that the people are kind of like naive. They're portrayed, especially at the beginning, portrayed as naive because like the Japanese come and bomb and there's a bomb that falls in a field nearby and, like dirt gets thrown up and they go, a black fountain?
Like they've never seen anything on fire before.
It's very weird.
They don't know what an airplane is. It's strange, but I don't know. I don't know what ridiculously rural Chinese people, what they would know about. But they just seem extremely ignorant in this movie.
It's like they're portraying them as these brave fighters against the Japanese, but also as like these
bumpkins.
Bumpkins, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, we have a note here. Walter Huston has a pretty big gut for a guy going through a famine.
Yeah, there's one scene where his belly is kind of straining at the little loops around his silk shirt.
Well, they have these ridiculous, kind of stereotypical, Chinese clothes that people wear. And
if actual Asian people were wearing them, it wouldn't be ridiculous at all. But the fact that you've got Walter freaking Huston and Katharine Hepburn and Tamirov or whatever his name is, the Wu Lien, it just looks so silly.
Yeah, in the end, they go, Wu Lien's dead. Sorry, Ling Tan and his wife and their baby, who definitely looks like them, are going to go farm the fields and free China while Jade and Lao and the other two brothers fight on against the Japanese.
And then they do the thing where they say the name of the movie. They say that
these people are truly the seed of the dragon.
Seed of the dragon, yes.
And everyone erupts into applause.
Yay.
They are indeed dragon seed. Also, by the way, before they burn the farm, he buries these things on the property. He's like, oh, let's bury these here so when we come back, we'll know this was our property. And I was thinking in my head, well, and I don't know if you're going to, when you come back, I think this will probably be part of a collective farm.
Yeah, proving this in court in the People's Republic of China might be a little difficult. I think that this book is part of a trilogy. This was based on a book, and I think this was book one of a trilogy that Perlis Buck would continue. So maybe that's a plot point that comes up later. Like they try to prove that this land was theirs, but they can't, or, something like that. I don't know.
Well, it's a fascinating. I mean, this is a propaganda film, 100%. This is a film designed to get people to sympathize with the Chinese, to hate the Japanese, to pay for war bonds and keep because this came out in 1944. So
middle of the war. Well, not middle, but
yeah,
it's in the
44 is the turning point in so many.
Yeah.
Well, yes, I mean it is that summer between June 6, 1944, and early September, the war changes a massive amount,
especially in China. Lots of stuff was happening in China in 1944. So I mean, this is a propaganda film. This is meant to get people to sympathize with the Chinese and to understand that there are allies against the Japanese. And I guess what I ask is, do you think it succeeded as a propaganda film?
At the time, it probably did, because it was probably shocking to audiences to see intimating that people are being assaulted, that young children are dying on screen of starvation. I'm sure people leaving the theaters furious thinking about the Japanese and all they've done. And because remember that the Chinese are considered a vital ally. Chiang Kai-shek, I think he met in Cairo with Roosevelt and Churchill. I don't know wasn't it that Stalin didn't want him at Tehran, but he did meet in Cairo. They flew him there. But Roosevelt imagined China as being a very powerful country after the war. He wanted them to have a seat on the UN Security Council.
They have a veto. China does.
They do, yeah, which at one point was held by Taiwan before the United States recognized the PRC.
I'm not super familiar with this particular conference.
No,
Cairo conference.
Looks like was it after or before? It's right around the time of Tehran.
Like a parallel conference.
Pretty much. But it's one of those things where, China was considered to be a vital ally of the United States during the war. And remember, United States interest in China goes back well into the 1800s as a trading partner, pre-Boxer Rebellion. We have always had, since the middle of the 1800s, a large financial interest in China as a market.
And a large community of Chinese people. There is the Chinese Exclusion Act that was passed under the Chester A. Arthur administration, but a lot of Chinese people lived here before that. And if you didn't know a lot about history, you might think that American relations with China were always bad, because you hear about the Exclusion Act, and then you hear about modern times, and you hear about communist China during the Cold War, and you think it's always been bad. But there was a period when American sentiments for China were very, very positive. Like after the Xinhai Rebellion happened,
Yeah, with the end of the Qing dynasty.
the end of the Qing dynasty, and especially when the Japanese invaded China, is when people really started sympathizing with China a whole lot and seeing them as kind of like parallel to America. They're overthrowing the shackles of these great empires. They're forging, a new world.
I mean, Sun Yat-sen, Shanghai Shek, they were Republican movements. They were not monarchists. They were seeking to fight off an aggressive empire who was threatening,
One of the most popular detective characters in America was Charlie Chan, which today would be seen as a ridiculous racist caricature. But at the time, it was like this really progressive thing that, we have this Asian American who's smart and he solves mysteries. He's hardworking. He works for Law and Order.
Yeah.
He's got a family. He's just a completely good guy. He doesn't follow the stereotypes of the sneaky, inscrutable alien Asian guy that Fu Manchu.
The yellow peril, the
yellow peril stuff. Yeah.
And it's interesting, you point out in the notes that we did before this, is that really it was America, that yellow peril concept people applied it to the Chinese. Then it became the Japanese, really, probably in the first half of the 20th century, particularly heightened with the sort of rise in Japanese militarism. And it reaches sort of its blood red zenith in the 40s during the war.
Yeah, Pearl Harbor made people crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it is remarkable that, one of the many great achievements, I think, of Franklin Roosevelt, and of his many faults, but one of his great achievements was the prioritization of the Germany first concept, sticking to that, making Germany the priority, because the popular sentiment would have been, let's go kill the Japanese. There was a tremendous amount of political pressure to avenge Pearl Harbor, and I'm sure there were people walking around saying, why aren't we attacking to Japan? Why are we going to Europe? We need to fight the Germans, but, the Japanese were the ones who attacked us at Pearl Harbor.
And the fact that Hitler declared war on us made everything so much more simple for going after Germany. If he didn't do that, there'd be a lot of people in America that would say, why on earth would we attack these guys? What did Hitler ever do to us?
But we've got to go fight the Japanese. That
right,
was
yeah.
And you see that. The Japanese are shown as these evil buck-toothed buffoons in this movie.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, you're familiar with Tintin, the comic book character?
Yeah.
A Belgian comic book character. I really like Tintin comics a lot. And one of the early ones was called Tintin and the Blue Lotus, which is set in China, and it's a very pro-Chinese, anti-Japanese comic book. And it's ironic because in this comic, there's these sequences where Tintin learns about what Chinese people are really like, and he laughs and he says, my goodness, all the stereotypes I heard about you people, and almost all of them are completely false. You people are just like us, kind of similar to some of the stuff in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, so it's like anti-racist against Chinese people. It's a little racist against Japanese people, though, because they have giant buck teeth and thick glasses that are round and toothbrush mustaches, and they all swing swords around, and they're just pure evil.
Oh, my goodness.
It's kind of a weird being progressive and being not.
Yeah.
But but in the service of the message, the propaganda. To be pro-Chinese, you have to be anti-Japanese.
No, absolutely. And in China will play a vital role during the war. Obviously, you have the Flying Tigers end up there, but really the American contribution is significant in China, CBI, China, Burma, India Theater, but it's all air power.
Yeah.
There's fighter groups, 23rd Fighter Group, which is the descendants of the Flying Tigers. You have bomber groups that were stationed there. But there were no ground troops. And there was only one American ground force unit that saw frontline combat in mainland Asia during World War II, and that was Merrill's Marauders in Burma.
Huh.
Otherwise, our contribution was by air, a very large contribution by air. And actually, the first B-29 raids are out of the CBI. They actually go out of India, of all places. And then a lot of those units were moved to China, where they raided all over China, including into Manchuria. And the first B-29 raid against Japan happens against the Yawata ironworks, steelworks on the western side of Kyushu. And those are from B-29s flown out of China in something called Operation Matterhorn.
Interesting.
And actually, the B-29s operated until March or April of 45, flying out of China, India, and Ceylon, Sri Lanka, of all places. So there were B-29 raids on Singapore, on Palembang, which are these huge oil refineries in Indonesia, Phnom Penh in Cambodia, Bangkok, all sorts of stuff. So, but interesting enough, part of that Ichigo was to knock out American B-29 bases and air bases in China.
Would American soldiers not serve in China because supply lines would be too unreliable?
Well, yeah, because the thing is that with the fall of Burma, cut the Burma road. So the only way to get supplies was to fly over the hump, is what they would
Over
say.
the Himalayas?
Yeah, the Himalayas. They called it flying over the hump. And it's really remarkable how many of these flights went through. And it was enough to supply bomber and fighter forces, but never enough probably for troops. And a lot of that aid was also just going straight to the Chinese to have them fight. And they probably figured it would be too expensive and too time consuming to send our own ground forces when we could better spend that just sending ammunition and weapons and food to the Chinese to fight.
Craig Jorgensens.
That's right.
In this movie.
Yeah, all these Craig Jorgensens.
But they certainly did. They tied up massive numbers of Japanese troops in China instead of island hopping and do all sorts of other stuff.
That's one of the great Chinese contributions is that the Japanese army was myopically focused on China. I mean, controlling and taking China was really the main Japanese war goal for many people. And those troops could have been well used in Burma, or imagine, landing on Saipan or Guam, but you had 2 times the numbers of Japanese troops there. I mean, the Japanese, a lot of strength that they could have used in other places in the Pacific, ground forces particularly, were tied down occupying China. And I mean, there was massive numbers of Japanese troops that had to be repatriated from China after the war.
Oh, man. In, I guess, prisoner of war camps? Were they in the Soviet Union or in China itself?
In China proper. And actually, the Marines landed in northern China very soon, like within a week, the signing of on VJ Day, within a week or so. And that's where Eugene Sledge served.
Yeah, he wrote a sequel to a
With the Old Breed.
With the Old Breed, right.
China Marine.
China Marine, yeah. I haven't read it, but it sounds interesting.
And part of that was there were actually combats where Marines and American Army soldiers actually did fight with communists, but originally their goal was to repatriate. One of the parts was to keep peace and repatriate Japanese soldiers from China back to Japan.
John Birch of the John Birch Society, he was an OSS agent that was killed by Chinese communists the week after the war ended.
And it was named for him.
Yeah.
The John Birch Society.
In honor of him, yeah.
Well, there was also a very large number of Americans who served as missionaries in China, and that's part of why there was that more favorable view coming around too. Like, it was the guy who created Time magazine, Henry Luce,
husband of Claire Booth Luce.
Yes, he was raised in China by missionaries, so he was very favorably disposed towards the Chinese and gave a lot of attention. I think Shanghai Shek was on the cover of Time magazine a lot, stuff like that.
And this guy also owned Life magazine and a bunch of other newspapers and stuff, so he's very influential in his pro-China message, and he was very pro-China. And, we mentioned Pearl S. Buck, the child of missionaries, and she spent her pretty much first part of her adult life in China before moving to America and never being able to go back because of the communists.
Yeah. And that's really also interesting, talking about sort of the history part too, is that one of the great failures really of the United States was losing China after the war. That loss, I mean, it was where Stephen Kotkin, there was a historian who wrote a biography of FDR, and then Andrew Roberts. It's like a round table of them talking about sort of the big 3 during the war. It was really interesting. It was fascinating.
Kotkin representing Stalin,
yes,
I guess.
And Roberts for Churchill, and then Kotkin for Stalin. And Kotkin says something really interesting in it, because they were talking about who really won World War II. Because you have some people who say, well, really, was it really Stalin that won? Was it really us? And Kotkin says there really are 2 clear winners: the United States and China. And he said that it's the position that China is left after the war that eventually leads to its ascendant position now. I thought it was very interesting, him talking about that. But China has this very important role, and it gets brushed over in the mainline histories of the war.
I mean, honestly, when it comes down to the details of the China part of the Second World War, I really don't know very much. I mean, Ichigo, I didn't even really know about that, to be perfectly frank with you.
Well, there's a lot of occupying and trying to consolidate. There's a lot of guerrilla fighting after the initial spurt of fighting with the nationalists. I don't know how many large set piece battles battles there were, because the nationalists too had their own issues, internal issues, high levels of corruption.
They even had the KMT, like one of their original main big guys, Wang Jingwei. He defected to the Japanese and set up his own little parallel. Supposedly, we're the real KMT in Nanjing.
Yeah, like Manchukuo.
Yeah, kind of a similar
Oh,
idea.
Puyi, you don't seem like you're doing anything right now. You're drafted.
So yeah, I guess part of it is that China is complicated too. It's kind of hard to keep track of the different factions. There's communists as well.
There's still warlords in probably more isolated parts of the country. Although, is it Kuomintang? Is it
so the KMT is an old version of Pinyin. So that like the old version of Pinyin uses different letters. Mm-hmm. So like that's why
the Wade Giles versus
exactly.
What is the new one called?
Is it Hepburn? I don't remember.
Because it's not. It's Shanghai Shek is from Wade Giles. I think it's Zhang Jinli, right? Or what's
it's Zhang Jieshi, I think.
Okay.
And instead of Chiang Kai-shek, but like. And like Mao Zedong.
That's where Mao Zedong.
Yeah.
TSE, that's Wade Giles, but it's Mao Zedong.
Yeah, exactly. So it gets a little complicated. So the KMT is actually Kuomintang. So it should really be the GMD, but it's the KMT in the
and they still exist, everybody.
Yeah, they do. They're
in Thailand. They're in Thailand. They've gone to Thailand. And
they lost the election in Taiwan recently.
They did, yeah.
Which is weird that the KMT was you could call it the pro-PRC party because they wanted to integrate more with the People's Republic of China, whereas the other two...
One Formosa policy.
We will make them us.
All China is Formosa.
The other two parties are moving towards a more separate identity, separate from being Chinese to being our own.
Don't they still use the Wade Giles in Taiwan?
Yes. Wade Giles is the system that Taiwan mostly uses. Though there are some people who prefer to use Pinyin, it's Wade Giles as the predominant one.
But a lot of people there probably speak Cantonese, right? Or some sort of Fuzhou dialect.
I don't really know. I know they use the traditional characters, but maybe that's on the way out. To explain the difference, there's simplified characters, which the communists adopted, and traditional characters, which are way more complicated. The number of strokes needed, the stroke count is way, way, way higher with traditional. So it's more of a pain in the ass to write. But they held on to it.
Writing any Chinese characters, I think they just gave people credit for making an effort when I was taking it because I was too late in life by the time I tried to learn it. Er Sansu Wo Liu Chi Ba Jiu Shi.
Oh, very good. You got all 10. Mm-hmm. Very nice. Hen Hao, very good.
Hen
Hao. So like we mentioned the KMT, here's a funny little story. I've been to Nanjing and I've been to the mausoleum of Sun Yat-sen. He's got this little pavilion and he's also got this tomb where you can see his coffin. And it's interesting, inside of his little monument, if you look at the ceiling, there's the KMT flag, the blue flag with the white sun. And I think it's the only place in the People's Republic of China where that flag is displayed anywhere.
Well, because the Chinese communists also claim him because Sun Yat-sen died in like the 1920s, didn't he? I mean, Shanghai Shek was in power really from like the 20s until like he died in like 1975 or 76. I think he outlived Mao or almost did.
It's crazy.
It's crazy to think they both lived well into the 1970s.
And it's also crazy to think about that Taiwan was not a democracy until
about 45 years ago. And even then, their first real elections were in like the 90s, weren't they?
Yeah, like the first competitive elections were in the 90s, I think. I think it was just the KMT in every election until...
Kuomintang, Kuomintang, 4 more years. 10 more years.
40 more years. Yes. South Korea was also a non-democratic dictatorship.
Park Chung-hee. Really not until about the 80s, 70s or 80s. Syngman Rhee, when it first started out, it was basically a dictatorship. It wasn't basically, it was.
Japan has had democracy, but they've also had very long streaks of the Liberal Democratic Party being in charge. Mm-hmm. Very long. I mean, they're pretty much the big dogs, even today, I'm pretty sure. Whereas in Taiwan, everything's the apple cart's been upset because then now they have three main parties and things are kind of crazy now for them politically.
Yeah, no, it's and also interesting fact about Taiwan, first place that Sidewinder missiles were ever used in combat.
Really?
On F-86 Sabres that the Americans had given to Taiwan, they allowed them to use Sidewinder missiles because in the early years of Taiwan, there were many clashes, like air and ground and like shelling between islands, and also air clashes with the PRC forces. There actually were raids on the mainland by like Taiwanese planes in the very beginning.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
But in the late 50s, some F-86 Sabres that we had given to the Taiwanese were using Sidewinders effectively against the Chinese until one of them got stuck in the tailpipe of a MiG-15 that was able to get back. And the Atoll missile was developed off of it. The Russians used that.
Oh my God.
The
That's
first
crazy.
effective heavy bomber the Russians had was a copy of the B-29. B-29s that had landed because they'd been raiding in Manchuria, landed in Soviet territory, and the Soviets said, "Thank you so much. We'll take those."
And we'll intern your pilots until
Yes.
the war's over, which I cannot understand the rationale.
To the Japanese until August 9th, 1945, they were neutral.
Unless you watch Mission to Moscow, and then you'll see they're just itching to go to war with Japan. They'd really love to do it, but just can't do it just yet.
Not
Sorry.
yet, guys.
Yeah,
Not
just,
yet.
Just give me 5 more minutes, and I'm sure I'll
We'll
be
get
on
around
there.
to it.
Yeah.
Well,
that was a thing in the debates between Nixon and JFK. They talked about Kumoy and Matsu, those two islands, and they're like within vision distance of the mainland.
yeah, they
They're
were being
right
shelled by the PRC.
It's crazy to think that they're right there.
Yeah.
You think Taiwan is so far away, but they have territory that's
Oh, the island Taiwan itself is far away. That's not visual
yes.
distance.
Well,
but
when I say Taiwan, I mean the Republic of China, I guess is what I mean, you know.
yes, the Republic of China versus the People's Republic of China versus the Democratic People's Republic of China, and then the happy democratic, very inclusive People's Republic of Happiness in China. The more you add on to that, the scarier the country usually gets. Like,
Republic of the Congo and the Democratic Republic of the Congo is
or Zaire, as some of us would know.
yeah, please. Authenticity.
I remember when it was Zaire still.
It's crazy that it was so recent.
Yes.
Like it wasn't until the first Congo War that it became the DRC, that Mobutu was still in charge in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
In living memory, Mobutu was still in charge. But times change.
They do.
Yeah.
Well, this has been quite a tangent off of Dragon Seed, but
Yeah.
basically to loop back, this movie is, wow, this was a roller coaster of a movie.
So I guess one final thing I kind of want to touch on, and I think this is really, this is the thing people are going to instantly think when they see Katharine Hepburn with the hair and the makeup and the tilting of the head. Is this movie racist?
Yeah, it is. Well, here's the thing is that I think that it is. Yes, it is. I mean, the portrayal, the yellow face, the slit eyes, the ridiculous Fu Manchu thing, that the low pan look that Walter Huston has going on. Yeah.
I mean, I definitely totally understand. But to play devil's advocate, I think maybe malice might be required to be truly racist. And it's not malice against Chinese people. Like,
no, they are the heroes. They are the good guys. But I think it's one of those. It was just, I think, perhaps to a degree unavoidable for the time.
Yeah.
But I mean, the portrayals themselves today would absolutely be
no. Yeah. Like this is
racist.
beyond no friggin' way. This is never going to happen. Nobody would ever make a movie like this.
Remember, they're pumping out movies by the bushel back then.
Yeah, that's true.
That's
true.
And propaganda movies particularly were of high priority. And also, if you look back then, the number of movies an actor would be in a year is crazy. Like, you look at some, like, actors from the time, they'd be in, like, 10 or 12 movies a year. I mean, they were, Ronald Reagan, he did, like, B movies in the 30s and 40s, and he said they didn't want them good. They wanted them Tuesday. Which, movies could be made on a much faster scale because they weren't, post-production wasn't as crazy. And
I watched a movie with my sister recently called Detour. It's like this noir movie, and it's made on an absolute shoestring budget. They shot it, I think, in 2 weeks, something ridiculous like that.
Yeah, well, it's crazy, yeah, but for that time that they were pumping these things out as fast as they could. So at a certain point, this wasn't like there weren't going to be movies with 3-year post-production sort of thing like that.
And like, if you're going to say, okay, we're going to make this pro-Chinese propaganda movie, let's get all Asian actors, it's like, Two things. One, are there enough experienced Asian American actors, especially women? Because there are men that you can pull on. You can get the guys who played number one son in the Charlie Chan movies, but like I can't think of a single speaking Asian female part in any movie before 1950. I'm really racking my brain here, and I don't think I can think of one.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there were, but it's yeah. I don't think they were. They agreed. They did not do it with malice, but it was more important the message. That's the most important thing about this movie is the message.
And if you want to get a message out, you want people to watch it. How do you get people to watch your movie? You put stars in your movie. Katharine Hepburn, big letters. Walter Huston, big letters. You loved him in
Mission to Moscow, and North Star, and Gabriel Over the White House, and you will love him in A Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and probably some other stuff too.
Many years later.
He was in like over 100 movies, I think is what it said.
Wow.
I mean, there weren't a lot of Daniel Day-Lewis's of the time who were, really picking roles carefully. I mean, people were in the studio system, so you pumped out things as fast as you could.
Yeah.
Wow, this has been interesting. It's been fun.
And it was a fascinating movie. We really enjoyed it. Some harrowing parts, but ultimately very glad we watched it. Very, very interesting.
Fascinating. We're a fascinating movie. But yeah, the Fu Manchu thing's pretty ridiculous.
I think the thumbnail for this is going to be Walter Huston in the hat.
Yeah.
I think it's got to be.
I think it does have to be. But yeah, no, we're excited for this new experiment we're doing with the channel.
Yeah, we got a couple in the queue that I think will be great.
We can say some of them if you want. Or...
Yeah, there's a ridiculous Soviet propaganda movie called The Fall of Berlin, made in 1950 while Stalin was still alive. And it's like, you thought Mission to Moscow was pro-Stalin. You don't know nothing. We've seen little snippets, and it's jaw-dropping, this movie.
Yeah. Cannot wait. And we've got some other ones too.
Yeah, like
The Wind and the Lion.
Yeah, the Wind and the Lion.
I love that movie. It's one of my dad's favorite movies. It's one of my I really like the movie. I haven't seen it in a long time. Can't wait to be talking about Sean Connery playing an Arabic guy. That'll be good. But it's also very history based. It's focused on a very interesting part of history we don't talk about a lot. Battle of the Bulge, also known as a documentary film.
That's a great work of alternate history, a documentary transmitted from a parallel universe.
Yeah, pretty much. The one where Belgium has a giant desert in it in 1944. Isn't it remarkable how Belgium in winter looks a whole lot like southern Spain during the summer? And then we're also going to review some other, we love bad movies and good action movies. Missing in Action, probably.
Yeah, there's some interesting things to discuss in that film, but we won't spoil.
We won't spoil it. That one's got a lot of good. Rambo 3, another very accurate portrayal. There's a whole bunch, and then some John Wayne films. The Fighting CBs. And there's some other stuff. We've got a bunch lined up.
I told you a little bit about this. The Wild Geese 2.
Oh, God, yes.
The Wild Geese 1, that's
I haven't seen
movie.
Wild Geese 2. I've seen Wild Geese 1, which is a wild film.
That is a wild film. Wild Geese 2 it's in the Institute for the Criminally Insane. That movie's beyond ridiculous.
Well, let's just say any movie in which Rudolph Hess is the hero.
Very dignified and gallant, and what a great guy. I wonder if he did anything wrong. I'm not sure. The jury's still out on that.
Yeah, we've got a lot of good ones. I'm trying to think, were there any other ones?
We mentioned the North Star.
The North Star, yes, another good. We're going to try and alternate between sort of propaganda films or...
That's another Walter Huston classic right there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, another Walter Huston. The gift keeps on giving, although John Wayne may be based off the number of... Oh, also The Conqueror, the one where John Wayne plays Genghis Khan, is going to make an appearance at some point. I'm very, very excited.
I've heard about that movie for my whole life, and I'm interested to actually see what it looks like.
And thanks to the powers of Amazon, we can now just get these films. DVD. Sometimes you can buy them on VHS, which is even funnier.
Back in the day, if you were a film buff and you wanted to watch weird movies, you had to track down film negatives and go to a university and have friends who could run a projector and stuff. Now it's so easy. It is so easy to watch so many old films.
Yeah, no, it's we're really excited about this new direction that we're going to try at least for a little while on the podcast.
And of course, we'll still be doing. I mean, we're editing a really long and good episode about the Mediterranean right now. Maybe it'll go up before this one goes up.
Yeah.
Who knows? We'll see what happens.
We'll see. If
and
not,
we'll keep doing traditional quote unquote episodes like that. But this has got me excited.
Yeah. As you can tell, we spent a lot of time talking about regular history in this one too.
Yeah.
Not so much about alternate history.
No, but
this is the history in general.
Yeah, this is more of a history in general one. Some of these ones will be more alternate history.
Battle of the Bulge, generally about history. There was something called World War II. There were people involved, and the Germans were the bad guys. And that's about where the history ends on that one.
Missing in Action, also a parallel universe, but we'll get into detail about that.
Yeah, beamed
later.
straight to us from a parallel universe. Well, I can't wait. It's going to be fun, and we're glad that y'all are going to be on this new experience with us.
Yeah. Well,
this is Matt signing off.
And this is Max signing off.
Have a good day, guys.
He resembles a sick cat.
If I had such a wife, I would beat her until she was not so good to look upon.
Yes, if more of that were done, there would be less trouble with wives. Eat first, my son, and your arm will be stronger for all this beating.
If a man wishes to read secretly for his own private pleasure, there are books for that. No? Well, then, for what is your book, Walter?
Sirs, I am come. We are come, sirs.
Do not be troubled, my son. It is often good to beat a woman.
Oh, yes. Yes, my mother.
Have you ever thought that somewhere very far below the spot where we stand, our land goes on until at last a stranger stands on it?
And plants seed and takes his harvest from it as though it were his own? But it is not. It is ours, and our sons after us.
Yes, the land is ours as deep as it goes beneath our feet, and the stars above our heads belong to us, and whatever there is beyond them.